let me explain something here. The international guidelines about breastfeeding, and this comes from the World Health Organization. It comes from all of the major pediatric lactation texts, the lactation science from around the world, including the policies of UNICEF as well as the World Health Organization. They all are very unified on this, that the correct way to breastfeed an infant is when the infant is hungry, when the child is asking. That's not permissive. That's just going about things in the way that the human organism requires for optimal well-being, optimal health, and optimal immune health in the gut, as well as optimal psychological health of the child. Really make sure that it's clear to you that we differentiate between a baby's needs and then an older child's needs. With an older child, if you just always say yes whenever they want something, yes, that's permissive, and then your child will not be respectful. And that's not a good way for your child to grow up. The exact opposite is true for a baby, especially around breastfeeding. That's not permissive. That's not being permissive, that's being responsive. The reason being that babies are incapable of waiting because they're unable, their brains aren't developed, so they are unable to imagine a future. That means when you say, no, I won't feed you now, I'll feed you at 3 o'clock because that's the convenient time, they can't say to themselves, that's okay, it will come late, wait. Babies can't do that. A 5-year-old child can do that. A 5-year-old child needs to begin to learn how to do that. That's called delayed gratification, because life is that way. You see, we need to develop the strength to live with the way things are. The opposite is true for a baby. So in breastfeeding a baby, saying yes to when the baby's hungry doesn't create a more dependent child. That's the very recipe for a child who will be more independent later. This is the paradox. With a baby, when you say yes all the time to a baby and you meet the dependency need, then they become more independent later. With a toddler or older child, that's different. With them, you have to say the truth. Sometimes it's yes, and sometimes I'm afraid it's no. Another thing to say, however, is your little child is 18 months old. That's right in the borderline between baby and toddler. You know, it's okay at this time, but if truly sometimes you're too tired or you don't have the time or the energy to breastfeed, you know, this is perhaps that you can just very slowly and gradually, it might be more tolerable for your child if you have to say not now, but that's more tolerable, you see, at around 18 months old. Perhaps you can begin that if you must, but what they recommend in World Health Organization is the optimal, the ideal is to continue breastfeeding on demand for maybe the first 2 years, and breastfeeding at least sometimes up until, you know, between the 2nd and 3rd birthdays is not a bad idea. It's good for the long term. This is what the lactation textbooks and the World Health Organization and the pediatric bodies, this is what they recommend. And the average weaning age, we don't all have to do the same, of course, is between 3 and 4 years around the world, believe it or not. In big cities and in busy careers in the modern world, a lot of people suffer from not being able to meet those requirements, and it's a bit of a struggle. I realize that. But as your child gets older, it's okay for them to have less often and less often and less often. Sometimes it becomes more about that beautiful comfort that they get from being so intimate with mum. And it really makes a difference to their emotional security for the rest of their lives. It's the most powerful thing that you can possibly give to your child.